The great hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with voices from a dozen different worlds. The Xanthari made their crystal-like sounds that meant they were unhappy about something. The Vorthic floated in their gas tanks and spoke through machines that made their words sound like wind through caves. The Kellerians clicked and buzzed with their insect mouths while their 6 arms moved in patterns that other species had learned to read as either friendship or threat. Jake Morrison sat in the human chair and watched it all happen like he had done for 12 long years. His hair had gone gray during his time here, and his face showed lines that came from too many arguments with beings who thought humans were just another small race trying to make noise in a big galaxy. Today felt different, though. Today felt like the last day he would sit in this chair. The vote had already happened, and Jake knew what it meant. The humans living on Kepler 442b would have to pack up everything they owned and leave their homes, so the Xanthari could dig holes in the ground looking for shiny rocks. It did not matter that human families had lived there for 30 years. It did not matter that they had turned dead soil into farms that fed people across 3 star systems. What mattered was that the Xanthari had more ships and more votes in. The Council. Jake stood up slowly and looked around the room. Counselor X9 of the Xanthari made a sound like breaking glass, which meant satisfaction. The other representatives were already talking about other business, as if forcing 20,000 humans to abandon their homes was just another item to check off a list. None of them looked at Jake as he gathered his papers and put them in his case. The human colonies had sent Jake here to speak for them and protect them. For 12 years he had tried to make deals and find middle ground and convince these alien minds that humans deserved the same respect they gave each other. He had won some battles and lost others, but he had always come back to try again. Today was different because today he finally understood that respect was something these beings would never give to humans, no matter how hard he worked for it. Jake walked toward the door and felt eyes following him, but no one called out to ask where he was going. In the hallway outside the Great Hall he met Lisa Parker, who had been waiting for him. Lisa wore the dark blue uniform of Human Fleet Command, and her face showed the same tired anger that Jake felt in his bones. "The ships are ready," Lisa said without any greeting. "Every human vessel in Council space received the recall order an hour ago. They are all moving to jump points now." Jake nodded and kept walking. They had planned this moment for months after. It became clear that the Council would never see humans as equals. The recall order was not just for military ships, but for every human presence in Council space. Scientists would pack up their research. Traders would close their stations. Diplomats would send their final messages and go home. Farmers and miners and teachers and doctors would all leave the worlds, where they had built lives among aliens who had never bothered to learn their names. In the docking bay, Jake saw the last human courier ship waiting for him. The pilot was Don Cooper, who had been flying between Earth and Council space for most of his adult life. Dan's face looked grim as he watched cargo loaders take the last boxes of human belongings onto his ship. "Where to, sir?" Don asked as Jake climbed aboard. "Home," Jake said. "Just home." The ship lifted off and joined a small fleet of human vessels that had been gathering in the outer system. Jake watched through the view screen as more ships arrived from different directions. Some were big military cruisers that had been protecting trade routes the Council thought were naturally safe. Others were small research ships that had been studying dangerous areas of space where other species could not survive. A few were passenger ships full of human families who had decided they would rather live among their own kind than stay where they were not wanted. Admiral Lisa Parker's flagship was the biggest ship in the growing fleet. Jake knew that Lisa had been quietly moving human military assets for weeks and preparing for this day. The humans had never been the strongest military force in the galaxy, but they had learned to be smart and careful and ready for trouble. Now, all that planning would help them disappear completely. The fleet jumped to hyperspace together and left Council space behind. Jake looked back one last time at the stations and planets where humans had lived and worked for decades. Some of those worlds would miss human food supplies within months. Others would find out too late that humans had been quietly fixing problems and preventing disasters that other species never even knew about. But Jake did not feel sorry for them anymore. He had spent 12 years trying to make the council understand that humans were valuable partners who deserved respect and fair treatment. He had failed because the other species had already decided that humans were small and unimportant and nothing Jake sighed could change their minds. The jump to hyperspace felt different this time because Jake knew he would never come back. The human colonies had been patient for too long while the council treated them like children who should be grateful for whatever scraps they were given. Now patience was over and humans would find their own way in the galaxy without asking permission from beings who had never bothered to understand them. In the weeks that followed Jake's departure, the council continued their normal business. The Xanthari began planning their mining operation on the former human world. The Vorthak started new trade agreements with other species. The Kelerians expanded their territory into areas where human patrols had once kept them in check. None of them sent messages asking where the humans had gone or when they might return. The empty chair in the great hall became just another piece of furniture that nobody noticed. The silence where Jake Morrison's voice had once argued for human rights became just another absence in a room full of alien sounds. The council had gotten what they wanted, which was a galaxy where humans knew their place and did not make trouble by asking for things they had not earned. But deep in space, human ships were gathering in numbers that would have surprised the council if they had bothered to count. The quiet departure was only the beginning of something much bigger that none of the alien species could have imagined. 6 months had passed since the last human ship disappeared from council space, and the first cracks were starting to show. Counselor Vex of the Calorians noticed it first during a routine military briefing when his commanders reported that their raids on Vorthak territory were meeting much less resistance than expected. For decades, the Kellerians had tested Vorthak defenses along the outer rim worlds, but human patrol ships had always appeared to help drive them back. The raids had become almost like a game where both sides knew the rules and nobody got hurt too badly. Now the Kellerians found empty space where human ships used to be, and Vorthak colonies that seemed confused and unprepared for real attacks. Commander Zek led the largest Kellerian raid force, and he told Counselor Vex that something felt wrong about these new victories. The Vorthak were not weak fighters, but their gas-based bodies made them slow to react, and they had always relied on human allies to provide quick support during emergencies. Without human backup, the Vorthak colonies were falling faster than anyone had expected. On the other side of the galaxy, Governor Halix of the Vorthak Empire was discovering the same problem from a different angle. The food shipments from New Dakota had stopped coming in grocery stores on 17 different worlds were running out of supplies. New Dakota had been a human agricultural world that produced grain and meat for species across 3 sectors, but now the planet sat empty with its farms still running, but nobody to harvest the crops or load the transport ships. Halix sent investigation teams to New Dakota, and they found something strange. All the human settlers were gone, but they had left behind detailed instructions for maintaining the farms and keeping the automated systems running. The instructions were written in simple language that any species could understand, and they covered everything from planting schedules to equipment repairs. It was as if the humans had known they would be leaving and wanted to make sure other species could take over their work, but none of the other species had farmers who knew how to work with New Dakota's soil and climate. The Xanthari were miners who lived in crystal cities. The Vorthak were traders who preferred space stations to planets. The Kellerians were warriors who took what they needed from others instead of growing it themselves. The humans had been the only species who actually enjoyed the hard work of farming, and now their food was rotting in fields while hungry people waited in lines at empty stores. Dr. Kresh of the Aquatic Depths brought more bad news to the next council meeting. The deep space monitoring stations that watched for dangerous asteroids and solar flares had gone silent in 3 different sectors. These stations operated in conditions that were too harsh for most species, but humans had volunteered to work there because they seemed to enjoy challenges that others found impossible. The monitoring stations were important because they gave early warning when cosmic disasters threatened inhabited worlds. Without these warnings, a solar flare could destroy all electronics on a planet, or an asteroid storm could wipe out an entire colony. Dr. Kresh's people had tried to restart the stations, but the equipment was designed for human operators and nobody else knew how to make it work. Counselor Vex 9 of the Xanthari was starting to feel worried about their mining operation on Kepler 442b. The planet's geology was much more complicated than their surveys had shown, and they were having trouble extracting the minerals they wanted. The Xanthari had expected to be pulling valuable metals out of the ground within weeks, but instead they were still trying to figure out why their equipment kept breaking. A Xanthari engineer named Flux 7 found some old human geological reports in the planetary database and discovered that humans had already studied every inch of Kepler 442b before they started farming there. The human reports contained detailed warnings about unstable rock formations and dangerous gas pockets that could destroy mining equipment. The reports also included solutions for these problems, but they were written in technical language that the Xanthari were having trouble understanding. Meanwhile, shipping lanes that had been safe for decades were becoming dangerous as pirates. And raiders learned that human patrol ships were no longer watching the trade routes. Captain Rex of the Vorthek merchant fleet lost 3 cargo ships in 1 week to attacks that would never have succeeded when human escorts were available. The pirates seemed to know exactly where the patrol ships used to be and exactly when merchant vessels would be traveling alone. The Council's emergency response network was also falling apart without human rescue teams. Commander Steve Collins had led human rescue operations for 15 years, and his teams had saved thousands of lives during natural disasters and space accidents. Other species had their own rescue services, but they were designed to help their own kind, and they did not have the equipment or training to work in all the different environments where emergencies could happen. When a Calarian science ship suffered life support failure near a dangerous nebula, the Aquatic Depth sent their fastest rescue vessel, but it could not operate in the high radiation environment. The Xanthari offered to help, but their ships were too big to maneuver in the tight spaces around the nebula. In the old days, human rescue teams would have been there within hours with specialized equipment and trained crews who could work in any conditions, but now the Calarian scientists had to wait 3 days for help that might come too late. Food prices were rising on every world, and trade disputes were turning into shooting wars as species tried to grab resources that humans had once distributed fairly through careful negotiation. The Vorthek and Calarians were fighting over mining rights in the Nexus system where human mediators had kept the peace for decades. The Aquatic Depths and Xanthari were arguing about water rights on shared worlds where human engineers had built systems that both species could use. In the council chambers, the debates were getting louder and angrier as representatives blamed each other for problems that were getting worse every day. The empty human chair sat in the middle of it all, like a reminder of something important that everyone had forgotten. Some of the older counselors were starting to remember how often Jake Morrison had offered solutions to problems that seemed impossible, and how many crises had been resolved quietly by human diplomats working behind the scenes. But none of them were ready to admit that they might have made a mistake when they forced the humans to choose between dignity and participation in galactic society. The humans had chosen dignity, and now the galaxy was learning what it meant to live without the quiet species that had been holding everything together, while other races argued about who was more important. 1 year after the humans disappeared, the truth finally came out in ways that no one could ignore. The Kellerian raids that had seemed like random attacks were actually part of a coordinated military campaign that was succeeding because no one was left to predict their movements or warn their targets. General Thok of the Calarian War Fleet met with Counselor Vex to discuss their unexpected victories against the Vorthek Empire. The Calarians had captured 40 star systems in 6 months, which was more territory than they had gained in the previous century. But General Thok was not celebrating because he knew something that worried him. The humans were watching us, General Thok told Counselor Vex during a private meeting. My intelligence officers found abandoned monitoring stations in 17 different systems. The stations were hidden and we never knew they existed. The humans were tracking our ship movements and predicting our battle plans and sharing that information with everyone we fought against. Counselor Vex studied the reports that General Thok brought and realized that human intelligence networks had been operating throughout Calarian space for decades. The humans had not been spying to hurt the Calarians, but to prevent wars by making sure that aggressive moves would always meet prepared resistance. Now that the intelligence networks were gone, the Calarians could attack without warning, but their enemies could also attack them the same way. Dr. Nina Foster had been the head of medical research at the Council's central laboratory, and her work had saved millions of lives across different species. Nina had developed treatments for diseases that affected multiple races, and she had shared her research freely with scientists from every world. But when the aquatic depths tried to continue her work, they discovered that all of Nina's research files were locked behind encryption that only she could open. The laboratory's computer systems was still running, and Nina's automated experiments was still producing results, but no one could access the data or understand how her treatments worked. Dr. Kresh of the aquatic depths spent weeks trying to break Nina's encryption before admitting that human computer security was more advanced than anyone had realized. Meanwhile, the Xanthari mining operation on Kepler 442b had become a disaster that was costing them millions of credits every day. The planet's mineral deposits were buried under layers of rock that contained explosive gases, and the Xanthari equipment kept triggering dangerous cave-ins. Flux 7 found more human geological reports that contained detailed maps of safe mining locations, but the reports were written in technical codes that would take years to decode. The humans knew this would happen, Flux 7 reported to Counselor X9. They studied this planet for decades before they started farming here. They could have built mines that would have been safe and profitable, but they chose to farm. Instead, I think they left the hard mining sites alone on purpose. The deep space monitoring stations that had gone silent were causing problems that grew worse every week. 3 Vorthic colonies had been evacuated because of solar flare warnings. That came too late. An asteroid storm had destroyed 2 Calarian outposts that would have been warned in time if the human monitoring crews had still been watching the sensors. Dr. Kresh sent teams to restart the abandoned monitoring stations, but they found equipment that was more sophisticated than anything the Council had ever seen. The human monitoring systems could track thousands of cosmic threats at the same time and predict their paths months in advance. The computers were still working, but they were designed for human operators who understood how to read the complex data displays. The most shocking discovery came when archivist Beth Williams returned to her old office in the Council Records building. Beth had been the head of historical archives for 20 years, and she had left behind files that could only be opened after the humans were gone. The files contained records that no one else had been allowed to see while Beth was still working. Beth's secret files showed the real history of human contributions to galactic civilization. The technological advances that other species had claimed credit for had actually been developed by human scientists who shared their work without asking for recognition. The peace treaties that had prevented dozens of wars had been written by human diplomats who worked behind the scenes while other species took credit for the negotiations. The files also contained detailed records of every time the Council had dismissed human concerns or denied human requests for equal treatment. Each incident was documented with dates and quotes and evidence that showed a pattern of discrimination that had lasted for decades. The final entry was a report that Beth had written 3 days before the humans left. The Council has made it clear that humans are not welcome as equal partners in galactic civilization, Beth had written. We have contributed more than any other species to maintaining peace and prosperity, but we are treated as junior members who should be grateful for whatever respect we are given. This situation cannot continue. Humanity must choose between dignity and participation. We choose dignity. The files revealed other secrets that made the Council representatives feel sick with worry. Human rescue teams had prevented 47 major disasters in the past decade by responding to emergencies that other species had not even detected. Human patrol ships had stopped over 200 pirate attacks and raids that would have killed thousands of innocent people. Human mediators had resolved trade disputes and territorial conflicts that could have escalated into system-wide wars. All of this work had been done quietly without fanfare or demands for special recognition. The humans had simply seen problems that needed solving, and they had solved them because it was the right thing to do. But now the problems were back and getting worse every day because the species that had depended on human help did not know how to help themselves. Captain Rex of the Vorthek merchant fleet brought news that made everyone in the council chambers go quiet. His shipping company had been analyzing trade route safety data, and they had discovered that the 3 major shipping lanes that connected all the inhabited worlds had been secretly patrolled by human stealth ships for over 20 years. "We thought the routes were naturally safe," Captain Rex told the emergency council session. "But the humans were watching them constantly and stopping threats before they could become dangerous. Now piracy has increased by 300%, and shipping costs are destroying our economy. The stealth ships had been so well hidden that no one had known they existed until they were gone. The humans had protected galactic commerce without asking for payment or recognition, while other species had built their wealth on trade routes they thought were naturally secure. As the evidence piled up, the council representatives began to understand the terrible mistake they had made. They had treated humanity's service as an obligation rather than a gift, and they had dismissed human contributions as unimportant rather than essential. Now they were learning what the galaxy looked like without the steady hand that had guided it for generations. The humans had not left in anger or revenge. They had simply removed themselves from a situation where they were not valued, and now the galaxy was collapsing without them. 18 months after humanity vanished, the galactic community was falling apart in ways that no one had thought possible. The Xanthari Crystalline Collective faced their first civil war in over 1,000 years, and they did not understand why their hive mind unity was breaking down. Counselor X9 called an emergency meeting with the remaining Xanthari colony leaders, but half of them refused to attend. The crystal beings had always shared thoughts and emotions through their collective consciousness, but now some colonies were blocking communication and making decisions on their own. This had never happened before, and it terrified the Xanthari more than any external threat could. Dr. Peter Kim had worked with the Xanthari for 15 years, helping them understand how individual thoughts could exist alongside collective consciousness. Peter's research had given the Xanthari ways to handle disagreements and conflicts within their hive mind without breaking apart completely. But Peter was gone, and his psychological frameworks were locked in computers that no one else could access. 3 Xanthari colonies had already declared independence from the collective and were fighting each other over mining rights and territory. The crystal beings were discovering that without human guidance, they did not know how to resolve conflicts between different parts of their own species. The civil war was spreading as more colonies chose sides, and the Xanthari Empire began to shatter. Like broken glass, the Vorthek Empire was in even worse shape after losing 60% of their territory to Kellerian expansion. Emperor Vash called for help from the council, but no other species was willing to send military support. The Vorthak were skilled traders and negotiators, but their gas-based physiology made them weak fighters who had always depended on human marines for ground combat support. General Murphy had commanded human ground forces that protected Vorthak colonies for over 20 years. His troops had been trained to fight in the methane atmospheres that the Vorthak needed to survive, and they had developed tactics that used both human and Vorthak strengths together. Now the Vorthak faced Kellerian invasion forces alone, and they were losing every battle. The Kellerians were winning their war against the Vorthak, but they were also discovering that victory brought new problems. The territory they captured required constant defense against other species who wanted to take it away from them. Without human intelligence networks, the Kellerians could not predict when attacks were coming or where their enemies would strike next. Captain Rachel Stone had led human deep space exploration fleets that mapped dangerous sectors and established safe passage routes for all species. Her crews had identified unstable wormholes and cosmic radiation fields that could destroy entire fleets. The maps and navigation data that Rachel's teams had created were stored in human databases that had gone silent when the humans left. 2. Aquatic depth-sea ships had been lost to what humans had previously identified as dangerous wormhole clusters. The ships had been carrying 50,000 colonists each to establish new worlds, but they had jumped into hyperspace anomalies that tore them apart. Dr. Kresh knew that human exploration reports contained warnings about these hazards, but the reports were encrypted and unreadable. The galactic economy was experiencing its first major recession in 3 centuries as trade systems that had operated smoothly for decades began to collapse. Human-operated trading stations had been processing nearly 60% of interspecies commerce, and their neutral oversight had been trusted by all parties. Without human mediation, trade disputes were escalating into economic warfare that hurt everyone. Currency exchange rates were becoming unstable as species tried to manipulate trade deals in their favor. The Vorthak accused the Xanthari of artificially inflating mineral prices, while the Xanthari claimed that Vorthak shipping fees were unreasonably high. Both sides were probably right, but there were no human economists left to analyze the situation and propose fair solutions. Food shortages were getting worse as agricultural worlds that had depended on human farming techniques struggled to maintain their crops. New Dakota was still producing food, but the automated systems were breaking down without human maintenance. Other agricultural colonies had tried to copy human farming methods, but they lacked the knowledge and experience to make the techniques work. The most terrifying discovery came when Dr. Kresh found ancient monitoring equipment that had been tracking cosmic threats for over 2 centuries. The equipment had been installed by the first human space explorers, and it had been maintained by human technical crews who worked in dangerous radiation zones that other species could not survive. The monitoring system tracked supernovas and rogue black holes and galaxy-wide radiation bursts that could destroy all life in entire sectors. 3 sectors had already been evacuated based on outdated threat predictions, but no one knew how many other disasters were approaching undetected. The system was still running, but it needed constant calibration and maintenance that only humans knew how to provide. Dr. Kresh sent technical teams to the monitoring stations, but they found equipment that was far more advanced than anything the Council had seen before. The human engineers who had built and maintained these systems had been working with technology that was decades ahead of what other species were using. Without these engineers, the galaxy's early warning system was slowly going blind. The Calarian expansion that had seemed so successful was creating new problems as conquered territories became impossible to govern. The Calarians were warriors who understood conquest, but they had no experience with administration or civil management. Human colonial advisors had helped other species establish stable governments on new worlds, but those advisors were gone. Riots were breaking out on former Vorthak worlds as different species fought over resources and territory. The Kellarians had the military strength to conquer these worlds, but they did not have the knowledge or patience to rule them effectively. The conquered populations were starting to rebel, and the Kellarians were learning that holding territory was much harder than taking it. Trade routes that had been safe for generations were becoming war zones as desperate species fought over dwindling resources. Piracy had increased by 500%, and shipping insurance costs were making interstellar commerce almost impossible. The human patrol ships that had quietly protected these routes were gone, and no other species had the resources or willingness to replace them. The council chambers were filled with angry voices as representatives blamed each other for problems that were getting worse every day. Emergency sessions were called almost daily, but no solutions were found because the species that remained did not know how to work together without human mediation. The empty human chair had become a symbol of something precious that had been lost through carelessness and pride. Some counselors were starting to suggest that they should try to contact the humans and ask them to return, but others argued that humanity had made their choice and should live with the consequences. None of them wanted to admit that the council had been wrong to treat humans as unimportant partners who should be grateful for whatever respect they were given. The galaxy was learning what it meant to live without the quiet species that had held everything together through service and sacrifice that had gone unnoticed for too long. 2 years after humanity disappeared, the Galactic Council authorized the largest search operation in galactic history. Every major species contributed ships and crews to joint fleets that would comb known space looking for any trace of human presence. The search was led by Admiral Tony Parker, who had taken over human fleet operations before the Great Departure. Tony had stayed behind when the other humans left because he believed that someone needed to maintain diplomatic contact between humanity and the galaxy. But after months of trying to negotiate the return of human colonies and getting nowhere with the Council, he had finally given up and requested permission to join the search for his own species. The joint fleets included Xanthari crystal ships that could analyze planetary surfaces from orbit. Vorthak gas haulers were converted into long-range scouts that could search nebulae and asteroid fields. Calorian war vessels provided protection for the search teams. Aquatic depths deep space probes could explore areas where other ships could not safely travel. What they found was both impressive and terrifying. Humanity had not simply packed up and left, but had vanished so completely that it suggested decades of careful planning. Every human colony and research station and military outpost had been systematically evacuated, but the infrastructure had been left behind in perfect working order. The search teams discovered that humans had been preparing for their departure much longer than anyone had realized. Automated systems continued to provide essential services for other species, while more sensitive installations had been sealed with security measures that no one could break. It was as if humanity had known this day would come and had spent years getting ready for it. Captain Ellen Davis led the search team that investigated the abandoned human research facility on Luna. The facility was still running, but it was locked down tighter than a military fortress. Ellen's technical experts tried for weeks to break the security codes, but the human encryption was too advanced for them to crack. Inside the facility, automated laboratories continued Nina Foster's medical research, but no one could access the results. The search operation revealed the true extent of human expansion across the galaxy. While the Council had tracked maybe 300 human worlds, the evidence suggested a civilization of over 40 billion people. Entire star systems that other species had considered unexplored showed subtle signs of human presence that had gone unnoticed for generations. Admiral Tony Parker made the most disturbing discovery when his fleet found hidden defensive installations throughout Council space. Weapons platforms and shield generators and sensor networks had been protecting other species from threats they never knew existed. These installations were shutting down one by one as their human operators abandoned their posts. The humans were not just living among us, Tony reported to the Council during an emergency session. They were protecting us from dangers we never saw coming. Every major trade route had hidden defense systems. Every important colony was covered by human weapons that could stop invasion fleets. We thought we were safe because of our own strength, but we were actually safe because humans were watching over us. The defensive networks were more sophisticated than anything the Council militaries had ever built. Human engineers had created weapon systems that could stop asteroid impacts and deflect cosmic radiation and destroy hostile fleets without any of the protected species ever knowing they had been in danger. Now these systems were going dark, and the galaxy was becoming a much more dangerous place. Commander Sarah Lewis was leading the Vorthak joint operation when she made the first real breakthrough in the search. Deep in the galactic rim, her fleet detected a massive automated beacon that was broadcasting a message in every known language. The message was short and clear, and it made everyone who heard it feel cold with fear. This sector declared closed to non-human traffic by order of the Terran Federation, the beacon announced. Trespassers will be treated as hostile. Humanity thanks the Galactic Council for teaching us the value of independence. The beacon marked the edge of a region of space that all galactic surveys had classified as uninhabitable. The area was filled with unstable stars and dangerous nebulae and gravitational anomalies that made space travel almost impossible. But as the search fleets studied the region with their best Sensors, they began to see signs of massive engineering projects. Artificial structures were hidden throughout the dangerous zone, and energy readings suggested industrial activity on a scale that dwarfed anything the Council species had ever attempted. Humanity had not fled to some distant galaxy, but had been building a fortress in the most dangerous region of local space. The uninhabitable zone had been engineered to look deadly, while actually serving as the perfect hiding place for an entire civilization. The search teams tried to penetrate the defensive perimeter, but they found more automated warnings and then active resistance. Human patrol ships appeared out of nowhere and escorted the Council fleets back to safe space without firing a shot, but with the clear message that further intrusion would not be tolerated. Jake Morrison himself appeared on the communication screens of every search vessel at the same time. He looked older and more tired than when he had left the Council chambers, but his voice was calm and steady as he delivered humanity's final message to the species that had driven them away. "Citizens of the Galactic Council," Jake said while looking directly into the camera, "the Terran Federation extends its gratitude for your years of instruction in the principles of interspecies relations. We have learned well from your example. You taught us that respect must be earned through strength rather than service. You showed us that contribution to the common good is less important than political power. You demonstrated that peaceful species will be taken advantage of by those who value dominance over cooperation." Jake paused, and his expression grew harder. "We have taken these lessons to heart and built our new civilization according to the principles you taught us. The Terran Federation is now a completely independent nation that owes nothing to the Galactic Council and expects nothing from it. We have everything we need to survive and prosper without any contact with species that proved unable to value what we offered freely." The transmission continued as Jake explained that humanity had been preparing for this separation for over 30 years. Human colonies throughout Council space had been secondary settlements, designed to provide cover for the real expansion into the galactic rim. The humans who had lived among other species had been volunteers who knew they might someday have to sacrifice their homes for the greater good of their species. "Do not attempt to locate us again," Jake concluded. "Do not send messages requesting our return. Do not expect us to rescue you from the consequences of your own choices. The Terran Federation wishes you well, but we will not be coming back. You wanted to see what the galaxy would look like without human interference. Now you know." The transmission ended, and the human patrol ships vanished back into their hidden fortress. The search fleets returned to Council space with the devastating news that humanity was not lost, but had deliberately chosen to cut all ties with the species that had never learned to value them properly. In the Council chambers, the representatives sat in stunned silence as they finally understood the full scope of their mistake. They had not lost a minor partner in galactic affairs, but had driven away the species that had been quietly holding their entire civilization together. The humans had served without recognition and protected without thanks and contributed without reward until they finally decided that dignity was more important than acceptance. The empty human chair would remain empty forever now because humanity had found a better way to live than begging for respect from species that would never give it freely. The Council had taught humans the value of independence, and now they would have to live with the consequences of that lesson for the rest of their existence. The galaxy would continue without humans, but it would never be the same. The species that remained would have to learn to solve their own problems and fight their own battles and take care of themselves, without the steady hand that had guided them for so long. Some would adapt and survive, while others would fall to challenges they had never had to face alone. The Great Search had found humanity, but it had also revealed the terrible truth that some mistakes cannot be undone and some losses cannot be recovered. The humans had left in silence, and they would remain silent forever.